Welcome to Farm Your Daily, a field-forward podcast. I'm David Geiger, your host. I've been on Iowa TV and radio for the last decade and excited to join you with this new podcast, Farm Here Daily. Today on the program, May is nearly over. We'll take a look at the state of the marketplace with analyst Angie Setzer of Consus Ag Consulting. Then ISU Extension agronomist Leah Napel tells us about the crop status in northwest Iowa. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, making sure folks in Iowa are informed about what's affecting our farmers. This is Farm Here Daily. And joining us on Farm Here Daily, we have Angie Setzer, partner with Consus Ag Consulting. Angie, always glad to talk to you about what's going on the marketplace, and I hope you've been having a pretty good month of May, maybe a bit better than some of the markets have been, but could you just briefly give us a recap of what we've seen this month? We could talk about it.
Yeah. It's definitely been one of those months where, I don't know, it could have been an email, right? This meeting could have been an email.
It could have been an email.
I don't really know what all has transpired, but suddenly it's the 29th of the month and here we are. No, that's tongue in cheek, obviously. There's been a lot that has transpired. But, for the most part here, as we work to wrap up the month and we look back on what's taken place, we've kind of been on a roller coaster of emotion. We're trapped in a glass case of uncertainty, when it comes to trade, when it comes to weather, when it comes to planting, and what all we're going to be looking at as we move ahead. And so, as we wrap up the month of May, we've gone absolutely nowhere fast. Like, I'd have to look at a chart, but I think we're basically, going to finish the month almost completely unchanged, which is a bit of a bummer. Though, one of the things that I've been reminding my customers here quite often is it's very, very rare to get a grain rally in the month of May that actually has legs. Traditionally, if we've had a rally in the month of May, it's hinged on a planting issue of some sort. And most of the time we end up getting that crop planted and it's resolved. And so, right now, to me, I think as we work to wrap up the month and look back on what's happened, we haven't really answered a lot of the questions that we had that we thought we may have answers to by now. If anything, we've introduced more questions, but from an overall money flow standpoint and some of these other things, we just aren't encouraging the speculator to come in and buy grains at this point in time. So here we sit.
I am reminded that springtime is our planting time, but it's also the harvest time for South America. So it tends to be a bit more difficult to market an older crop when you have the new crop coming in down there.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that we're dealing with here, more recently has been the conversation about the Brazilian crop size and what that all means. We have taken a pretty decent jump in expectations. We started the year, around the 125 sort of area. Million metric tons, that is 125 million metric tons. Last year we were in Brazil, total crop size was closer to 119. And so we started 125, and with the beginning of planting progress to, halfway decent and conditions looking good, we slowly started to see that creep up to where the USDA last month came out at a 130 for the total Brazilian corn crop figure. Consensus started to creep up even further towards a 132. 135 on the high end was kind of the talk even as recently as 10 days ago. But now all of a sudden we have a lot of conversation of, well, what if it's a 140? Most of the folks boot on the ground wise are saying that a 140 is probably a stretch. And we tend to see this quite often. I mean, I think that's one of the things we're really good at in market analysis is, any sort of situation that we have, we exaggerate. So even if whether it's, this was bad, it's only going to get worse, we're going to zero out the crop, or, in this instance where it's like, oh, well, it looks good, I bet it's just massive, is kind of what we're dealing with. Now, the one thing we have seen is Brazil has been, shipping soybeans pretty much to at maximum export logistics capacity. That's going to start to dwindle down a bit, and they are going to move over into corn here as we work our way into August. This isn't a surprise, but we did see Brazil win some business into Taiwan, earlier this week that had pressured the market. A lot of folks are going to get worked up that this is going to lead to cancellations. That was the rumor that we had heard earlier, throughout much of the day in Tuesday of this week or Wednesday of this week, either way. And so it's just one of those things where sentiment's a bit negative. The idea is that the Brazil crop is large, which it is. It's reasonably large, probably not as large as what we think. And on top of that, that doesn't mean just because it's big, it's not going to flow directly into the pipeline immediately. But it's just one of those things where you have a bit of a negative sentiment that is a result of increased farmer selling out of South America as they work to harvest their crop, and a U.S. producer and end user that's kind of moved to the sidelines as we work to get our crop here across North America planted.
Now, something I've been keeping an eye on, just because it's so prevalent in the news, is the stock market and the dollar just kind of zipping up and down. However, it seems to be because I think a lot of just the tariff and trade talk that's been going on around the world.
Yes.
And have we been seeing that same level of impact on commodities this month?
It's been the opposite this month, and that's one of the things that we've seen in a big way has been money flow. If you look back the month of April, we had Liberation Day on the 2nd of the month, and everything kind of fell off really quickly, outside markets, commodities, all of that. And within a week, we saw corn rally. Like if you look back at the corn chart, post Liberation Day, we saw corn work its way back up towards that $5 mark. Beans were able to kind of get a bit of a bid. Wheat had got some legs underneath it. And so when you saw a sell-off in the outside markets, when you saw the S&P, kind of erase any gains that it had since November and some of these other things, you saw folks want to come to grains. Couple different reasons. First off, in times of uncertainty, you always want to own something that hurts if you drop it on your foot, like a bushel of corn or whatever. And then secondly, there was this idea, post trade war announcement that a lot of the resolution would be driven by trade deals. We thought that we would see, Japan come in and agree to buy a lot of bushels. You'd see India come in and agree to roll back their extreme tariffs that they have on agricultural products. Some of these other things. And so the sentiment was a little bit of, well, ags in particular will benefit from this. The outside markets will not from the uncertainty, but then it started to reverse, and we saw this sort of idea of, okay, well, we're not getting trade deals done. We're not seeing a substantial increase in exports at this point in time. And honestly, it's not necessarily looking like we will. You saw India basically say, hey, we'll roll back some tariffs on ethanol and some other things, but we're not going to hurt our farmer for you. Japan echoed that sentiment and some other ones out there. And suddenly you started to see the outside markets rally as well. The cash started to come out of commodities and go into the equities and others. And so I think that is something to pay attention to, and something that, before much longer, it depending on how the narrative shifts, because we do have the uncertainty now with the court throwing out the tariffs. Do we see a continuation of tariffs? Do the Trump administration approach it differently? Do we see potentially a shift away from worries over recession and ideas that inflation comes back into play? And so there's a lot of room left to see money start to flow back into commodities. But until we have some type of big story, it just seems like they're making enough in the outsides. They don't need to even think about us.
As you move into June, as someone who watches the markets, what are you looking for particularly next month?
I'm definitely the biggest thing that I'm going to be watching, outside of weather, obviously, because
weather's a big thing.
Weather month. But for me, the biggest thing that I'm going to be paying attention to is what happens in the cash corn market. There's a lot of uncertainty or a lot of confusion this year, or maybe a mismatch. The conversation amongst cash traders is, hey, the spreads shouldn't be this weak. Basis hasn't really been exceptionally strong, you could say. It's not necessarily indicative of a tighter crop or a crop in a carryout situation as tight as what the USDA is currently forecasting. Now, we don't have to look very far back. 12 months ago, we were basically having the opposite conversation. Spreads were strong, basis had been strong throughout much of the year outside of the areas that had been impacted by bird flu or whatnot, and so there was a conversation that, hey, perhaps the USDA overstated the crop size because of what cash is indicating here. And so we got clarity a year ago as we worked our way through June. Basis tanked, spreads widened. The farmer had been holding on to a substantial amount of grain and put it into the pipeline the last part of the summer. And it's just basically reflected what the USDA had said. Now, the question is, throughout the month of June, do we see spreads begin to strengthen? Does basis continue to firm? Do we kind of discover that the commercial has grown somewhat complacent when it comes to their origination, and now they're sitting short July, August, September? You've got some Eastern Corn Belt planting delays that could really make the cash market that much tighter as we get into September. It's, the September contract's not necessarily a new crop contract anymore, potentially. And so there's going to be several things I'm going to be watching in the market itself, outside of weather. And the biggest one's going to be cash movement in both corn and soybeans, as we work through June, just to kind of get a feel to, if the USDA is right or wrong. And that'll be seen, through a strengthening in spreads, a strengthening in basis, and just an overall feeling of tightness in the market.
Angie Setzer, partner with Consus Ag Consulting. Before I let you go, can you tell us a little bit about Consus Ag Consulting and how to get into contact with you and your husband Carl on any market needs or market questions?
Yeah. We at Consus, it's been around for a minute. We're working on year 4 now, which is crazy to me. But
that is pretty
we work
crazy.
with farmers on cash marketing. Really, I've got over 70 customers that I work very, very closely with. Here in Michigan and across the country. To do cash grain marketing. We bring in, think like a merchandiser is kind of our slogan there. And so Carl and I both have a merchandising background. And we bring that in to help our growers kind of tackle their cash market decisions. So you can find out. We also put out commentary each day that is, kind of based on what we would want to be reading as merchandisers in our previous lives as well. So you can check us out on the web, consusag.net, or you can find me on Twitter or TikTok at Goddess of Grain.
At Goddess of Grain. Angie, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Angie. This is Farm Here Daily. We'll have more conversations in a bit, but let's take a look at that closing market number for Thursday. Here we go. July corn down 4 cents, 4.47. September 2.5 cents weaker at 4.27 and a quarter. Soybeans in July 3.25 cents higher at 10.51 and 3/4, with August 3.25 more at 10.48 and a half. Soybean meal in July, $2.70 a ton, in the green at $296.40. Wheat in July, 3.75 cents more at $5.34, with September rising 3.25 at $5.48 and 3/4. In the livestock market close for Thursday, June live cattle up $1.60, a hundredweight at $215.52. August rising $1.90 at $210.07. Feeder cattle in August $4.30, a hundredweight more at $299.92, with September rising $4.37 a hundredweight at $298.85 a hundredweight. Lean hogs in June down 25 cents at $100.02 a hundredweight, with July falling 32 cents at $102.97. That is the Thursday market close. You are listening to Farm Here Daily. And joining us on Farm Here Daily, we have Leah Napel, a agronomist for ISU Extension in Northwest Iowa. Thank you so much for joining us, Leah. I'm glad to talk to you again here on Farm Here Daily. And let's just take a look at what's going on the grounds, the fields over in your part of the state. How are things going?
Yeah, things are looking really nice so far. So we had a really open planting season. Growers were able to get seed in the ground pretty easily. We didn't have many delays. So crops have been in the ground for quite a while at this point. They were looking really good. Emergence seemed like it was going well. We are starting to see some problem areas popping up in fields, but there doesn't seem to be a single factor that's causing that. It's kind of different for every field. Those issues just starting to pop up. But so far, insect pressure has really been low. weeds are starting to pop through. So a lot of those second applications will be coming now or in the near future. But the crops are going really well. We recently got some moisture, which helped quite a bit because we were a little bit behind there. So we welcome that moisture. And if we can keep up that moisture timely throughout the growing season, that would be best.
Now, speaking about that moisture, we have noted that Northwest Iowa is not necessarily doing the greatest in that department right now. But how does this compare to last year around this time?
Yeah, so we had a couple crazy years. The past few years, we've had some extreme drought situations gone into the spring season with very, very little moisture in the ground, or last year dealing with excess moisture in some parts of Northwest Iowa and extreme flooding in areas. So we've kind of seen all sides of the spectrum the last few growing seasons. So this growing season, we went in, we did subsoil moisture samples mid-April, and we are sitting right at average. So we have data that goes back to the 1950s of subsoil moisture, and we are right at average going into this growing season. So we felt pretty good. But like I said, planting season was very open. We didn't have much moisture at all during that period while the rest of the state was still getting moisture. And so we're starting to get to that deficit. So these last few rains have been welcomed, but we still need to keep up that additional moisture in order to get a good crop at the end of the season.
Leah, what are the phone calls you're fielding from your farmers in your part of the state right now?
Yeah, the last few phone calls have been about weed pressure issues. So either the chemicals out there not working quite right, or trying to kind of make decisions on um, what steps to take going forward, especially when we look at that calendar date and not wanting to go backwards by putting seed in the ground at this time. So those are a lot of the calls I'm fielding right now, along with, of course, the drift calls, trying to decide what to do about chemicals that might have drifted onto your field that weren't meant for your crops. So that's kind of taken over the phone calls at this time.
What have been some of your recommendations, or maybe you're just pointing them to some resources at Iowa State University? What would those be?
Yeah, so the one main resource right now is looking at planting date and yield potential. So we have some nice resources on that. So if a grower is contemplating replanting their field, or if they have some areas that didn't emerge quite like they wanted to, we need to look at the pros and cons of putting seed in the ground at this time versus keeping it in the ground and keeping some of that potential that is left there. So every field, every grower, it's a different phone call every time, just weighing the pros and cons of those situations. But that's really what this time of year really seems to be filled with.
Now, let's dig into some of the weed pressure you were talking about. Is this just traditional water hemp, or what type of problems are you seeing?
Yeah, there's a lot of water hemp that's starting to break through for sure. Other ones, it's maybe not necessarily the weed specifically, but that the chemical didn't work. So they've got big patches of weeds out in their field that, of course, we need to figure out if there's a chemical out there that can kill those, and if the crops below them are still going to have their full potential, or if they need to disc it under and start again. And so kind of talking through some of those discussions. And like I said, it's different for every grower, and we can't expect these chemicals to be miracle workers in some of the situations where if the weeds have broke through and they've been growing and thriving for a long time, it's really hard to get a chemical to be able to kill them. We need to kill the weeds when they're small. So having those discussions with growers can be difficult, but if we can get them the resources like Iowa State has got, point them in the right direction, that really helps them with their decision making.
Has Northwest Iowa dealt with much in terms of insect pressure yet?
No, I'm not hearing too many calls of insect pressure yet. You know, every year there might be a field here or there, but I haven't gotten any calls yet of issues that growers are dealing with.
As farmers are scouting their fields over the next couple of weeks, what would you recommend they particularly be watching for?
Yeah, watching for, like a lot of growers right now have seen the emergence, watched it come through. So getting out there and getting stand counts. And if there's any issues in your field, trying to pinpoint what it is. So some of the issues may be from equipment issues. And so that's something that we really want to nail down so you're not seeing it again year after year. and Iowa State has some really good planter resources and workshops for growers. So it's really important. That's something that we can have control over. So we want to make sure we're scouting for that. Then also scouting for just maybe emergence issues. If you have some compaction areas out in your field, we tend to see that quite a bit. And then keeping an eye out to make sure we don't have any drift issues from any neighboring fence lines or fields, because we don't want to get to the end of the growing season and have a low yield along that fence line and not really know where that came from. So just keeping a constant eye on the fields, watching for any areas that seem to be developing differently, and making sure that insect pressure or weed pressure isn't catching up to you.
Now, before I let you go, is ISU Extension doing any field days in the near term that you'd like folks to be aware of?
In Northwest Iowa, we've got a couple coming up. So we've got a little program that I'm doing coming up in the middle of June for women in agriculture. So all the way from gals in high school to maybe retired or landowners, or people who are actively working on the farm. So it's for women in agriculture in Northwest Iowa to really get hands-on experience with scouting out in the field, what we're looking for at that particular time in the growing season, but also getting resources from Iowa State for what to look at further in the growing season. So I'm really excited about that. We've got 2 different dates, 2 different locations to hopefully get as many people as we can into that workshop. The other field day we'll do is on July 9th at the Northwest Research Farm. And we have several different speakers for that day. We've got a roundtable event after lunch, and that's always a really good event. We get folks from Iowa State there, so farmers are able to ask their questions, hear about what research they are up to, and of course get to walk around the research farm, see what research we have going on close to home, and then hearing from the staff at the research farm about what they're seeing, and we like to hear their input as well, so we know what projects to work on next.
And how would folks sign up for some of those? That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Women in Ag program, you can call either the Lyon County or the Sioux County Extension Office, whichever one you're closest to. They can get you more details on that. We've got the information out on our Facebook pages, news releases, everything. If you can't find it, give me a call or give your Extension Office a call, and they can point you in the direction. And then for the July 9th field day at the Northwest Research Farm, we do not do registration for that, so you're more than welcome to come to that day. But again, we've got information online about that research farm day and the speakers that will be there, and just more information on sponsors and such. So you can check any of that online. If you can't find it, your Extension Office, if you give them a call, can point you in the direction. Yeah, that's kind of the fun things we've got up on the calendar soon.
Leah to Napel, ISU Extension Agronomist for Northwest Iowa. Thank you so much for joining us on Farm Here Daily.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is Farm Here Daily, a field forward podcast. Thank you for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local Iowa content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast as well as our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. Additionally, you can find me on social media at Geiger Reports, as well as WHO TV Channel 13 every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and we'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.